My name is Lauren. I am the ED at YouthLine. My pronouns are they, them. I'm very glad to be here in Ottawa on unceded Algonquin territory. And yeah, I'm thrilled to be here with so many of you celebrating YouthLine's history, presenting this in partnership with Kindspace. We're excited about that. And so I'm going to do our land acknowledgement, and then we'll get into the details of today. So LGBT YouthLine works in the place often referred to as Ontario, which continues to be colonized land and is home to many Indigenous communities. Our head office is in Takaranto, or Toronto, and it is on the territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Wendat, and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, the meeting place of Takaranto remains home to many Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island, and YouthLine works in this community, in this context, and on this territory. So this afternoon, we are excited to engage in an intergenerational celebration of YouthLine's 30 years and a reflection of 2SLGBTQ+ organizing. We're excited to hear from some amazing movement builders, organizers, thought leaders from Ottawa, and hear about their respective journeys in contributing to a world where queer, trans, and two-spirit youth are safe and celebrated. And so please note that we will have a photographer here today taking some pictures. And we are also live streaming, so hello to everybody watching us on YouTube. Like I said, we are delighted to partner with Kindspace, the oldest registered LGBT-specific charity in Canada, and where YouthLine saw its foundation through Pink Triangle Services. So for now, I'm going to hand the mic over to Noah, YouthLine's current operations manager, who will also be our moderator for today. So please welcome Noah.
Hello, how's everybody doing? Gotta pick up the energy in here. We're celebrating a birthday. YouthLine's 30. Come on, let me hear it. Let me hear it. Awesome. So I'm so grateful to be here today. You know, it's nice to partner with Kindspace and honor the history of YouthLine and also its connections to Ottawa. So today I'm super, super excited to welcome our beautiful panel. So first up, I would like to welcome Faye Johnstone. Come on up, Faye. Faye is an amazing leader here on these lands who's doing great work on advocacy in the government, advocacy for 2SLGBTQ rights, and really leading the way and the path in the ways we address discrimination and 2SLGBTQ hate and the rise of that in these days. So Faye, so excited to have you here. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Keziah. So Keziah is one of our youth board members at YouthLine, and I like to call Keziah our social finance queen. So Keziah has done such a great job in our board in helping us fundraise and understand the social finance landscape, and so excited to chat with you today, Keziah. Next up, we have RJ Jones. RJ Jones is an amazing interdisciplinary artist here on Algonquin territory. They do so much in the realm of technology and protecting 2SLGBTQ community and creating safe spaces online and through gaming, and also has done a lot in the realm of access to sexual health for marginalized communities. So excited to have you here, RJ. And last but not least, we have Robert Alsberry. Come on out, Robert. So Robert Alsberry is our fellow American on the panel, but has been here in Ottawa, I believe since 2015, 16, and has really led the way in creating Black queer spaces in Ottawa. Is a trans health nurse at the Centertown Community Health Centre. Is a member of the Black Gay Men's Network of Ontario. So Robert is so foundational to communities here in Ottawa, and I'm so grateful to chat with you today. And to all of you, thank you for being here. As Lauren said, I'll be your moderator. So I'm just gonna sit down right here, take my seat. Again, my name's Noah, pronouns are he and him. So a bit about me. I'm the current operations manager at YouthLine. But when I graduated with my social work degree in 2014, YouthLine was my first job in the field, right, as a young person. And to return to this work just a few years ago and be a part of this work in supporting 2SLGBTQ youth and community is a huge honor. So super happy to be here today and super happy to have you all. Give it up for yourselves, please. All right, panelists, let's start to get to know a bit about you. Like, I introduced you a bit, but I want to hear more. The people want to hear more. So please introduce yourself, your name, your pronouns, your experience in the Ottawa community, and yeah, just a bit about like what you do and what's on your mind today and your heart as we celebrate 30 years of YouthLine. Robert.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Robert. I use he, him pronouns. Throwing my phone already. Great question. Yeah, as Noah mentioned, I moved to Ottawa in 2016 from Canada, and thinking about prep for this panel, one of the things I was thinking about of the Robert in Pittsburgh was working and partying with his friends every weekend and wasn't really thinking about life more than that. But moving to Ottawa, community organizing came from a very selfish place and interest. I moved to Ottawa and was like, where are all the Black people at? And having that, I think in the States, I liked being Black, but moving to Canada was like, no, I love being Black. And I love Black people and Black things, and I love Black queer people. And didn't really appreciate the community that I had and that I left. And so started creating spaces that have something to be a part of. And so, hopefully as we go and building on that of how that's grown and evolved. So what's on my heart today is, first of all, spending this amazing time with these amazing people. Some I know better than others. I'm very curious to hear about what work they're doing and their lens that they're applying to life and how they're taking care of themselves and others. And same for me. That's what's on my mind and heart today. I want this to be a very caring, loving discussion that's a lot of fun.
So thanks, Robert. Let's go. Let's reverse. Let's do Faye.
There we go. I also hate having like a mic stand, so I'm just gonna like be that person who holds the mic in my hand. Hi, folks. My name's Faye Johnstone, she, they pronouns. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today. Shout out to SAW for hosting us. I love this venue, and I was joking that I'm not used to seeing it in daylight, but it's a great space to hang out in. I've lived in Ottawa since I was 11 or 12 years old, more or less grew up in this city, and have had the pleasure of like finding myself in this space. I think, what I do today is I lead a queer advocacy organization called the Society of Queer Momentum. That's role is trying to respond to the nightmare situations that we're seeing in Canada, in particular in New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, as we see for the first time in my adult life, Canadian government starting to roll back on the rights and freedoms of trans kids and their families. But I was like birthed and formed in this city, came into myself as a young queer kiddo who was unhappy with my experiences in high school and started getting involved in community organizing and grassroots efforts, trying to help us push for better, dream for better. And my fun facts that I always have to share are first, I have the two cutest ferrets that you will ever experience. Their names are Mocha and Latte, and they were so energetic this morning when I woke up and let them out of their cage. And second, I am always highly caffeinated, so if I speak really quickly, and if this is always a note I like to give to the interpreters, you can just gesture and I'll slow down, and I'm sorry in advance. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Faye. Keziah, yeah, go for it.
Hello. You know what? I'm getting the gist. This is...
There you go.
Hello. I'm Keziah, pronouns she, her. One last. There we go. Hello, and like the other day, like someone asked me, like, oh, like how long have you been in Ottawa for? And I was like, oh my gosh, I've been here for 5 years. This was supposed to be a transition city. This is embarrassing. But I actually love it here. I am a student at University of Ottawa. I am in political science with a minor in social impact. And like that word, social impact, has been knocking at the doors of like our nonprofit friends, our charities, our, collectives, our organizing. And, people who want to give us money want to know what our impact is, and I have been, as like a little policy nerd, trying to like understand what the space is like. And so I work, I originally started in fundraising, so I was at the Canadian Centre for Gender and Sexual Diversity, and then I went on to do consulting for the Enchanté Network, other smaller organizations, trying to bring more energy and basically data, or whatever the heck everyone wants to call it, into our communities. Where are they putting our money? Where are they putting the money that's for our children, our youth, our peers? And so I'm like, it's time to start, mobilizing those channels here. I've done policy work for UN Women. I've done work with Children's Aid Foundation of Canada. So a lot of my advocacy is bringing like the queer lens into the child welfare system. And I wrote a book with Children's Aid Foundation, so that's being released, which I'm super excited for. Yay! So just little things here and there, but a lot of the work that I do is regarding like boring like grant writing and like stuff like that. But if you were looking for an eye or an ear, I would love to take a look.
I was going to say, as someone who streams, mic stands are pretty important to me. Hey folks, my name is RJ. I am Soto Cree First Nations, originally from Saskatchewan, but I am now on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of Algonquin Nation. I would say my advocacy has definitely changed a lot during the years, from spending time in communities with, and watching like Noah and Faye grow up alongside me, which is weird to say now that we're in our 30s. Like intergenerational conversations actually does make a lot of sense. We did a lot of advocacy, always on the front lines of doing work, whether it was really improving visibility of like trans folks within, pride parades, to like for myself, like really working with Two-Spirit people to ensure that visibility and the needs of Two-Spirit people were known within more mainstream LGBTQ like organizations, and to see a lot of the things shift has been really amazing. But I swear we have like gone off on the original timeline that we were supposed to be on through COVID, because the way that it felt like we were almost at like a point of acceptance of trans people, and we completely strayed away from that. So I've actually shifted a lot of the ways in which I engage in activism to see like how are people navigating these conversations online, and also like blending into spaces with other people online to better actually like let people know of like what does that look like in our spaces when it comes to education. Education has been something I've always been passionate about. I usually use art as a tool to be able to like engage with others. I've worked in sexual and reproductive health for many years, and that has often been a very taboo subject amongst my community. So finding ways to really like create bridges amongst a lot of different conversations has been important to me. But as I get older, and not being like a young person who is like, in the basements of bars, like in having secret meetings about pride, and finding ways to, do kind of like more on the side acts of like, what does resistance look like as you get older? This is definitely a conversation I'm passionate about, because I am very much a believer that we have to be okay with passing the torch to like the next generation. And I'm very much okay with taking a step back and seeing what young people are doing, because they are super clever. I'm pretty sure I saw on TikTok someone fake their death who had millions and millions of viewers just so that they can make a post about supporting Palestine. And I think that's a really, really innovative way that I've seen young people like fight back in ways that I would never have thought of. And I think about this a lot in the ways that, being accountable to the next generation as an older person, what are ways that I can do to support those people? And that's kind of where I'm going to be taking my perspectives from today, and things that I feel my generation could have done better to support queer people. But what can we do moving forward?
Exactly. Give it up for them, y'all. Give it up for them. This is really a powerhouse panel of some folks who have really, really made a mark on Ottawa and created some safer spaces and helped us improve community overall. And this is just some of us. I know there's some folks out in the audience that I can see right now who are also a part of that work. So just so grateful to have this work today. I guess we'll start with you, Robert. When you think about your work and your life so far, what's an important moment that stands out to you in shaping the work that you do today?
When I first moved to Ottawa, I had the pleasure of meeting Rosie, who many of you know, who now has moved to New York and living her best life. But she was such a pivotal person for me early on when I moved to Ottawa, because I remember her saying, Canada will militarize you around Blackness. You know, and this coming from a Black queer femme person was really something that lived in my head. And I, in that first year, I really got to unpack and sit with what she meant. And the experiences that I was having, like, I did not have the skill set to deal with how specific anti-Black racism looked like in a Canadian context. It was traumatic. Fortunately, I had the luxury of having access to mental health and having a support system to impact those. But I share that as a way of saying that's what kind of made me want to think more than just going to just being a social person and just going to work. And so, as I mentioned before, how I got into community organizing here in Ottawa was, you know, somewhat through a selfish lens. I was like, oh, Ottawa Pride is going to be boring. Let me volunteer to make it somewhat interesting. So I volunteered at Max that summer, and it actually was a really fun Pride. And it was interesting beyond that side of Pride, the organizing side of it. And then that led to, at the time, Max had a community maximizer program. It was a micro-grant program. And so having this in the back of my mind of being militarized around Blackness and be by default queerness, because Blackness is very queer in a North American context, in a Canadian context, right? Because Black people were never designed or built to be in Canada in any forceful way, whether it's enslavement or the intentional not allowing Black people to move to this country, or, you know, even thinking about myself as an RN. Canada didn't allow Black women to go to nursing school till the early 50s. Many Black women had to go to the US to get nursing training. And so on all aspects, just seeing how my presence here is queer and a revolutionary act, just being here. But that being said, that led to me to wanting to have a Black queer discussion group. At the time, Max was Guys Into Guys. I don't know if they still are, but so it started off as a Black queer mask discussion group, and it was well received. And so when I got hired full-time at Max, which is a position that I should not have gotten, I had no comms experience, but what I did know is that I was Black and I was queer and I was competent and I was going to figure it out, and I wanted to make sure that there was a Black person in that role. And so when I started working there full-time is when they had asked me to run K1 as a full-time program. And so last year, one of my intentions was being part of Legacy, and so to have run that group for 6 years, have amazing co-facilitators, and to be able to identify someone else to take over that space and to see it running into its 7th year in November, and now going from the organizer to legendary participants, as I like to call myself, and seeing that space grow to where there was 8 to 10 folks monthly to now there's 30, 40 people showing up every month, looking for community, looking for space, looking for resources, looking to feel seen, looking to be heard, has been just a really wonderful thing to see. And that's flowed over to all other aspects of my life, thinking about my current role as a trans clinic nurse. I just stepped down from the board of Katie, which does HIV/AIDS and other harm reduction training for service providers. And then, as mentioned before, being part of the Black Gay Men's Network and wanting to forward that work in terms of Black queer people, working for our own liberation. Yeah, it's been a really great and fun ride, and it's something that I did not expect when I first moved here.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can just give you your flowers right now, I'll say I started organizing and facilitating groups for Black queer folks through Kindspace around 2015. And, you know, we didn't have even 8 to 10 people coming out, right? And to hear in 2024 that a Black queer social group has about 30 to 40 people coming on a weekly basis, I just want to really give you your flowers for that consistency that you put in creating spaces and visibility, to the point where this year at Capitol Pride, we had the first Black queer DJ showcase, right? And that's because of the energy and the work that you put in. So just giving you your flowers. Yeah,
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do want to clarify K1 is monthly, although we used to be once a month. But
Right, yes.
yeah, and I think that really speaks to hoping, we'll get to this more later, but I just want to insert, I thank you and I appreciate that. Because this is imperfect work and it's harder than it should be sometimes. But I think it also speaks to imagination and before I let the mic go to someone else, just to say I think seeing people come to a space where they can imagine themselves so much more than they were, and seeing that fruits of that labor show up has also been just as, if not more meaningful than having been part of K1. The folks who have come and said, oh, because of this group, I've been able to XYZ, feel more comfortable, do more. When I first moved there, people were hesitant. People were like, oh, what, like, Black queer things? Like, aren't we going to invite white people? Like, there was, like, no. This is our space, and we're going to claim it. And you can claim that, too, and see that fulsomeness in people's lives. It's been, I think that's been the biggest honor.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Robert. RJ.
Can I hear the question?
Yeah,
Just for
absolutely.
accessibility?
So, RJ, what's an important moment that stands out to you as important in shaping the work you've done before, today, in general?
I would say, honestly, like in 2020, or it was like 2019, there was like the Two-Spirit Ball that was actually hosted like in this space. I think up until that point, like there were very little spaces that I would be able to consider where I feel I could just be like my full self as being like someone who's Indigenous, who is queer, who is trans, and just be embraced for all parts of that. And I feel like throughout my journey of working in and out of like communities since I would say about like 2016, 2015, 2016, for me it was so important to be able to like feel a space within Ottawa where all of those parts were honored, because it's not often, and still like there's not many spaces where like you can be queer, trans, like Indigenous. And that's something that I often think about when I think of my friends who are in other places like throughout Canada, like in the north, where that experience looks very different, where it is oftentimes people are thinking about whether they're able to come out or not. And I feel like a lot of people in cities don't really understand that, conversations of queerness and transness look so different when you're rural, and the further you are up north as well. And I often think it's important to have those conversations here because it is a completely different world. Also, as someone who is from the prairies and has made that shift to living in urban Ontario, things are very different. Like, it's a very different reality when you live in a place that is like very, very racist towards Indigenous folks. So these are things that I often think about, like within activism and within organizing, is like how are Indigenous folks able to take up space and feel good about that. I definitely think too, like within a Canadian context, there's a hyper invisibilization of Indigenous people. And for me, like beyond that is like, how do you feel like visible as someone who's also like queer and trans when you're also invisibilized within that community? So there is a high rate of like suicide amongst our communities, and that's something I've also lost friends to. It's something that I don't wish on others, but is something that is still happening. Which is very disheartening because I've been doing, work like this since 2015, and to still continue to lose people to that shows that there is a problem that still needs to be talked about and solved, that has a lot of like complexities. But honestly though, that moment where there was like, a Two-Spirit Ball, it was really honestly like the most fun I had ever had at an event, and it really showed me like the power of art, the power of like coming together, and also it brought Two-Spirit people from like all over the world, because I don't believe it also too, like indigeneity is, beyond Canada, is like really like Indigenous to the land, and there are a lot of Indigenous people worldwide. So it was really awesome to see Indigenous people outside of Canada who had come for that specific event. So for me, when I think of that particular time, it was really, really powerful and shaped how I navigate the work, but it's always been like the experiences that people within my community who are invisibilized that I really try to bring forward, but still say there are struggles for sure. Like, I feel definitely there's a lot more openness around like queerness, but I definitely still think very strongly we're definitely going back on the gender piece, and really like I know we're all gonna at some point talk about that today, I'm sure, but for sure like there is like struggles that are still happening, that I still think about, and I think about friends who inspired me to do this kind of work who aren't here. So how do I honor their spirit and continue forward and do the work, but also like feeling motivated to do the work even though we still have those kinds of losses. And that's something that I've definitely experienced the past few years of being like redoing or like reforming what my activism looks like, but also to still remembering like, you know, we can still do work when we have the capacity to do that work too, and ways that we can take care of ourselves. So for me, like, I'm very much a roots person. I like to take care of like the roots of a plant. I enjoy ensuring that people are taken care of. And then watching those people kind of bloom in spaces has been something that's been really healing for me, and just the bridge building as well. Also too, like, I would say I wouldn't even be on this journey either of doing this kind of work if it wasn't like for re-meeting Noah. Because actually Noah and I went to high school we went to middle school together. We went to middle school together. I've known Noah for a very, very, very long time. But re-meeting in our adulthood really shifted like my understanding of like queerness and how to be open and caring and loving to everybody. And I think that's also important when we're talking about queerness, because oftentimes I feel this community comes under a lot of fire, but I find like the friendships that we're able to build and create really allow us to sustain and continue to do the work. So that's definitely something I think about a lot around this, but also too, like, I can't help but think about the people I've also lost through like the journey of this work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, RJ. I think that was a really powerful statement in remembering those who are no longer with us, and making sure we honor them and carry on their message. And you know, those roots that you really planted in, RJ, are really felt. I would say across this country. I mean, just a month ago, I was sitting in a training, and the first thing they said was, before we start, I want to give credit to most of this training being supported by RJ Jones. Right? And this was a training on how to support organizations in indigenizing their practices, and making spaces better for Two-Spirit and Indigenous queer folks. So I just really want to give a big shout out to you for both the local and national work that you've done to support us. I mean, thank you. But yeah, Keziah, what's an important moment that stands out for you as important in shaping your work?
Thank you. I will say in 2015, I was still in high school. I was in grade 9. I was a baby, and I would say queerness was like the last thing that I was ready to champion about myself. I think that everyone knew I was loud and I had something to say, but it was never about my queerness. Maybe my blackness, you know, maybe the foster care system, maybe, you know, something that I felt that was, I think the word is maybe qualified to talk about, if that even makes sense. And in probably 2 or 3 years ago, when I was working at CCGSD, we were invited to the Dignity Network roundtables, and it's an international like forum where partners and organizations from all over the world come down to like talk about how Canadian organizations can support their work. And I was a baby. I was fundraising assistant at that time. I was like, please, Debbie, like, it's okay, like, please let me come. And I remember attending and just feeling out of place, but also like, okay, I'm getting the lay of the land. And you guys know the meme? It's like, why are you gay? Like
Yes.
Okay, so the news reporter, he was talking to this man who is the director of SMUG, which is called Sexual Minorities Uganda. And I remember seeing him, and I was like, oh my gosh, guys, that's like Pepe Julian, like, oh my days. Like, he's done amazing work. Like, Uganda has insane family value bills. Like, they are passing, like, very, very harmful stuff. And, like, he's here today to, like, speak his truth. And, like, after we went to the lookout, and this man's keying, like, he's having so much fun. I'm like, I don't know, it kind of took me aback, and I was just like, I forgot that our spaces are like new. They're like, I am being radicalized. I am watching, you know, my peers. I'm watching my like mentors and people who I look up to also live in their queerness and also be inspired by the work that they do and feel joy and feel wellness and feel happy. So I think for myself, like watching, you know, Faye and the Debbie's and the Noahs and the Robs and, you know, everyone just working and being in their space, I'm like learning from everyone. I'm learning how to like make a name for myself, but also like, what does it mean to be in community? What does it mean to be intersectional? What does it mean to, you know, support our brothers and sisters across the seas? And I think I'm Ghanaian, and, you know, the Family Value Bills is happening, and I'm like, I'm gonna post about it. I don't care if Uncle's gonna see it. I'm gonna talk about it at, you know, the boring finance meeting. I'm gonna talk about it in, you know, these spaces. And I think that moment kind of just like brought me back to earth, and it was like, you are working for the visibility of somebody. You're working for the representation of yourself and your friends and your families. And it just taught me that like we have so much more to do, and like it's not as simple as like waking up and like applying to work at a job. It's more so about understanding what we need to feel safe around each other. And yeah, so I'm very thankful to be here. And I think for myself, like knowing that I'm still being radicalized and knowing that, you know, I'm still learning from my peers is how I'm moving forward. And so, yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure, Keziah. And I think, like, you know, you do a really great job in pointing out that our liberation is connected in a lot of ways, which I hope we'll talk about a bit later, right? But, you know, our liberation is connected across the world. You know, we're not free until all of us are free, but also recognizing, you know, how we think about queer and transness in North America, how that trickles down into the world, and, you know, how we can see the results of colonialism and these anti-gay laws on the continent of Africa. And, you know, I think there's a lot that we can do here with the resources and privilege we have to support those causes. Yeah, so thank you.
Kisses.
Yeah, Faye, do you want me to read the question?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No, I got it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So I think I'm gonna cheat. I have 3 moments, but they're connected. The first one is actually like a moment of whiplash. I grew up as like a white kid from a like middle class suburban family. I'm a military brat. I like moved across the country and like lived in a world that was built at my convenience. And where that was like a thing that you wouldn't even notice because of that experience. And I remember it shifting very fundamentally when I came out of the closet as trans. And that is the moment that radicalized me. It was just like the moment stepping out of my apartment it was 2017 on New Year's Eve, because I wanted to remember when I came out, and I'd forgotten when I came out as a gay kid previously. But just that moment of like seeing how much the world changes how it treats you the moment you show up looking different than it expects, and like knowing that that wasn't just a moment, but that was like a series of moments that would never go away until you become painfully used to it. And I remember just being radicalized by the idea that I shouldn't have to get used to this. And then also, you know, as I've grown up, seeing what living in that world does to our community. You know, as a trans gal, like, I often say that I wish that this world allowed my gals to not make themselves small for like a straight cis world's convenience. But you see that happen over years as people get hardened to a world that is hostile to them. And that just like drove my activism as a little baby gay. It was just like, it made me so angry. And a lot of it was like the contrast, right? Like coming from a world where it was like, I mean, I still got a lot of that. I'm still from a middle class family, still a white gal. But seeing how much shifted in that moment has powered my activism through rage ever since. And then the second one is a moment that happened just over a year ago, and it is one that has like changed my approach to advocacy ever since. And that was the moment where I started thinking that we might be losing. And that's been a really depressing moment, but you know, my work is looking at what's happening in New Brunswick and Saskatchewan and Alberta, and seeing that, you know, in our lifetime, we're seeing regression on acceptance, rights, and freedom for queer and trans people. And in particular, like seeing that we aren't ready to respond. You know, I was on the calls with the like queer and transes in New Brunswick when this started happening, and we weren't as a movement ready to tap in and support them as they deserved. And then to see the same thing happen in Saskatchewan, and then to see the same thing happen in Alberta. And it started making me ask questions around like, how are we organizing? How are we like bringing folks into this space? And I often say like, I love our world and I love our movement, but on the opposition side, like the far right treats you like family, and we engage as if you have to like pass an unwritten test. And so how do we do this work in a way that changes hearts and minds, that brings people with us? My line these days is like, if it doesn't work for a farmer or a factory worker, I want fuck all to do with it. It's Saw, I'm allowed to swear on stage, right? Okay, yes. And so that piece is like, it's got me thinking about how are we creating community? How are we building space? How are we like inviting people into these movements? Because it is a really small group of folks all too often, and there's a reason for that. And so, you know, I think we are gonna win this thing to like maybe shift away from doom and gloom, like do not mess with queers and transes, we're gonna get organized, we're gonna cause good trouble. But the moment of reflection that this isn't just a moment we're in because the far right has a new strategy and a new tactic, it is also because there are ways we need to change how we organize to build these bridges, to build these movements. And then my last thing, because I said 3 and they are connected, is seeing, you know, the mom in New Brunswick who has a 7-year-old trans daughter and who has to wake up every day and wonder if that kid's gonna be safe going on the bus, and that mom who is speaking up despite the fact that she is scared for herself and for her kid. The queer and trans folks in Saskatchewan who are, I love them. The Saskatchewan gays are gritty and edgy, and they have great punky energy that we have lost in our big city gay life. But seeing them like creating ways of organizing that would not work in Ottawa, because these are like much more conservative small town environments, but seeing that they actually have skills that we can learn from them that will actually answer that first question of how can we organize differently, and then seeing the same happen in Alberta. So those are my 3 things, but I'm not gonna break the rules. I gotta go pee, and these folks went pee before the panel started, so I'm gonna be right back.
Please
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Faye. Absolutely. You know, often at YouthLine, we serve youth who are in Ontario, 29 and under, but we are one of the only queer and trans peer support lines in Canada, right? And with things happening around this so-called country, we do see, you know, more contacts coming from out of province, right? And I think that, you know, Faye is speaking to sort of like what is going on around the country, how can we speak to each other? Yeah, I think that is one way that we could sort of like move forward, not recreate the wheel, and actually support each other in doing the work. So yeah, I really appreciated that message from them. To shift gears a bit, RJ, you mentioned, you know, our journey together in our organizing and our advocacy. I really learned a lot from you about the connections and the shared experiences that Black and Indigenous folks have. I learned a lot about how we can see Blackness as a form of indigeneity. I learned a lot about your people and the people of this land. And so I guess my question to the panel is, how can queer and trans settlers work in solidarity with Indigenous communities? How do we honor Indigenous knowledge and frameworks in the work that we do? Robert, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, yeah. Thinking of Maya Angelou's words, which has been used by many other people, but to credit her in this context is, no one is free until we are all free. And so one of the things that I sit with a lot is my own privilege as a cisgendered, able-bodied gay man, and not sometimes creates tunnel visions, because, you know, my world is shaped by the constant vigilance that I have about racism and homophobia. I remember when the first time that I realized that I was Black, I was being held in my father's arms, and someone had spray painted "Go away nigger 666 KKK" on our house. And I remember, like, as a nuclear family, my father holding me, my mother holding my sister's arm, we were watching this spray paint. This was in Pittsburgh, where I'm from. In the early 80s, I was born in 79, I'm 45. I'll drop my skincare in the deets. Just to put some context, so I'm not just speaking, but, you know, not that long ago, right? And so I remember asking my dad, like, why did they do this? And I remember him saying, oh, it's because we're Black, you know, and we have these lines that we cross, we don't come back from, right? So this awareness is there and it's present. I remember my gay awakening, which was from many things, but I remember particularly, it must have been preschool, first grade. My older sister and I walked to elementary school. My sister's 3 years older than me, and in her class photo, there was a picture of this boy who was also the crossing guard. I don't know if you had those in Canada, but the kids who got to wear the orange sashes. And I was in love with him. And I ripped my sister's photo up and to have this picture of him. And I remember showing him, like, I have your picture. And I remember the way he looked at me like, what is wrong with you? Which in hindsight he should have, but also like, this blind, that was crossed and there's no coming back from that. And so I think it's one of two things in which acknowledging that we have to take off our tunnel vision sometimes, that all of these isms are intersected and we all have to fight together to break them down. But then also in the context of when we're working for liberation for some, we're also doing it for all. One of the things I had the pleasure of doing was writing the land acknowledgement for the Black Gay Men's Network of Ontario. And one of the things that we acknowledge of, doing this work on Turtle Island in this province that still continues to practice anti-colonial violence, that still is, applying a genocide to the rightful bearers of this land, also recognizing the overlap of, as people of the African diaspora who have been either displaced from our homelands because of colonialism, who have been negatively impacted by forced religion, who, this history of enslavement, and, the understanding of how historical trauma changes our DNA and shapes us. So these things live in us, they live in me. And so, as we collectively work to make things better, or as I try to in my own small way to make things better for Black queer people, that I'm also working in line with Indigenous people. So it's a two-way street. I think it's like always consciousness of what's around us, who came before us, who's presently doing this work, but also we can be focused on our task at hand.
Absolutely. Thank you. Keziah, RJ, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll go for it. So this past summer, I worked at this place called Common Approach to Impact Measurement. It was tedious work. Basically going over, I'm not even gonna go over what it was, but it was, I came in at a time where they had put their new model in front of a bunch of Indigenous consultants and leaders, and they're like, so what do you think about this little framework here? Like, can you, give it the stamp? Can we, get your little drawing? Can we go? And I was like, they're like, oh, just, read through it and see if you can make some changes on like our own model. And I was like, guys, like, what are you doing? This is not, like, you've missed the mark completely. And it took me a while to like go through and read the whole thing. And there was mentions of, privacy and the way we collect knowledge. And the one thing that, stuck out to me was one of the respondents had wrote, impact to me is, feeling in community. Impact to me is like warm air on my face. Impact to me is like an Indigenous Wakanda, someone had written. And in that moment, I was like, oh, like, we're talking about relationality here. We're talking about something that's like outside of the realm of like numbers and, graphs. We're talking about impact that is about well-being and balance. And that's not something I think that Western knowledge does well, is seeing things outside of the binary. And we know that because of white supremacy anyways. But I think that watching, the disconnect between, my friends and my people say that, like, we need to break down the way we, understand things that can be impactful, or understand what change looks like to our community, or understand what, moving forward or moving the dial is in our communities looks like, but from an Indigenous perspective. It kind of shifted my gears, because I was like, I didn't think that I thought that I knew what that meant, but it doesn't seem like I do, because it's a feeling. It's not a framework. It's not a proposal. it's a creation. It's something that people have, been working on for years and months and decades because it's within generations and ancestors. And I think that for myself, I had an experience earlier this year where I was on a panel and I was with a friend, and she is half Métis and half Ghanaian. And she had asked if we could go to the Native Family Child Services and have like a knowledge keeper, like basically pray over us before we leave and, speak on this panel. And I was like, girl, like, let's go. Like, I got there and I got my, my offerings, and I remember just sitting there and listening to the connections that were being made. And I was like, I would have not been able to feel this secure in myself and what I'm about to say if I didn't have this type of guidance. I didn't have this type of connection. And I think that within a youth perspective, I know that in developing these frameworks, we're trying to like understand, but also like allow, like give them the space, give them the money, give them the community, give them the, the platforms to do what they have to do, because we are not coming to reinvent the wheel. We don't know what, they have to say. We don't know what, what years and ancestors have taught and are imparting. And there's no, room that we can make that will allow for an integration when we're talking about dismantling a whole system. We're talking about creating new ways of doing and new ways of being, and that will continue to like not persist if we don't, create the space for these leaders to like lead, to change, to disrupt, and to give us, the knowledge that we are missing. Because I think that we operate from a place of, paternalism when it comes to integrating. So yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Keziah. Faye, what are your thoughts? The question is, how can queer and trans settlers work in solidarity with Indigenous communities? And how do we honor Indigenous knowledge and frameworks in the work that we do?
As the white gal on the panel, gonna like name the like learning and managing, but I think like, so part of it to me is I think, we speak like buzzwords around intersectionality a lot. I think it is actually like taking the moment to like pause and think about that, right? So when we think about the like realities of queer and trans people on this land, like it is inseparable from legacies of colonialism and colonial violence. And so I think like, it is like, how do we speak about that in a way that connects those experiences and helps like build a foundation that works better for everybody? And I think part of it to me, that means recognizing and like telling the story. Like, why do we have the 2S in front of the acronym now? Like, how did that evolution come about? Why? And what does it mean beyond that? And then how do we go a little bit deeper? And so I think part of it is like, how do we do partnership in a different way? Like in my work, I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned is like, again, communities will organize differently in different parts of this country, in different communities of this continent. And I think I'm gonna shade Ontario. I know that YouthLine serves the whole province, so sorry to Ontario. But like, I have been going into Saskatchewan and Alberta in the last few months, and these, I love them to death. They are also provinces that like to tell Ontario to fuck off. And with very good reason. I had a gathering of a bunch of organizers from across the country in Ottawa 3 weeks ago at Kindspace. And one of the most interesting things was to see and learn how different communities organize and how it doesn't always work. And to see like, I'm gonna joke about the Vancouver girlies. Like they came in with their drop-in bell hooks left, right, and center. They have all of this language and lingo, and they're quoting all of these texts. And then my like broke Saskatchewan trans drag king is just like, we don't, like, we're poor and like, we don't, like, it's all like farmers and the vibe is different. If we organize this way, they would come for us in a different energy. And so I think that is the like, sometimes I think we forget that like even living in Ontario comes with a lot of power and privilege, living in like queer space and having the privilege of listening and talking in this thing. And so it is like coming back to, what is our vision of the future? What is the history that brought us to this space? And then how do we not come in with that paternalism that I do think is both like a thing intrinsic to like white folks' approach to stuff, but also to like, urban centers and like the life and lifestyle that we are able to lead. And so it's like approaching with humility, approaching like, I love it like when somebody like drops a slur in like the homophobic context and you're like, okay, wait. But also you're like, this person hasn't had this conversation yet. and understanding and taking the time to understand why they're engaging this way. And it's not always from the place of harm that we imagine it would be. And so how do we build and hear and then honor that story? Because that helps them come along with us too.
Leave it to you, RJ, for the last word if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, so I was definitely exactly what Faye is saying is one of the things that I also have been reflecting on a lot recently is how, I have been looking at communities and how particularly also the alt-right are able to just kind of unify together in ways that I feel like the left is just not able to do that. And then when I think about my own community and the ways that I've seen my own community othered in queer spaces, it reminds me exactly of the larger conversation I feel that needs to be had in these spaces where I strongly believe that like we do having access to academic language, while some people might understand that, it isolates a ginormous population of people who need to be having these conversations. And as I'm in my day-to-day work, it is looking at how do we make this content, or content like this, more accessible to everybody who needs support, who needs help. And this is something that I've always been passionate about as someone who's like also dropped out of the university, and a lot of like the ways in which I engage in activism isn't from like academia that I learned in university, but things that I've learned from like community members. And for me, learning about Two-Spiritness, even like I sat down with Two-Spirit people and I talked to them about like their journey and their experiences. And to me, that was more valuable than whatever I could have learned like in a classroom. And I think a lot of the times there's like a disconnect from people who go on like the front lines and like bombard people with language and want those people to be on our side. But when you're isolating an entire population of people, like we are in a losing game right now. And I think that's important to think about. And I try to like center my work around that. And it's why I go into communities to understand like how are they able to make that kind of connection? And it is like from creating like a family unit of people who have like similar goals and values. But I find, for a group that is incredibly progressive, like we aren't at the end of the day. And I often remind myself too, like I found that like having access to this language and understanding like intersectionality, like when I go back into my community, like my community does activism quite well, like doing blockades, like going to Parliament Hill, like, Idle No More. Were those movements rooted in like how to say things, quote unquote like properly? No, like absolutely not. So I often think like how would we explain these things to like our grandparents? How would we explain these things to like our older relatives to make it more accessible? Because it's just not, we are not going to move forward if we're not willing to create spaces to allow the people who have made mistakes to come back in. And I think it is important to like also realize too, like as someone who's from the prairies and has a very different perspective than people in Ontario, one of the things that I often found is like even in community spaces with like Ontario natives, they're like, yeah, we can get through racism, it's not a big deal, but they're like also in Mohawk territory, and like Mohawks are really well known for their strength in community. But like when you're in a territory where like it is half Native people and half white people, and there are other, of course, communities as well. Like the racism is very, very different. It is very potent. Like the conversations that we're having in Ontario do not at all look the same throughout the prairies. And honestly, too, like I will say, like the land acknowledgements that I've seen, like in Winnipeg, literally destroy like people would destroy us. Like it would be politically incorrect and I was at a museum. I was like at the big museum in Winnipeg, and then a white person was on the stage being like, "I'm not supposed to be here," and I'm like, whoa, I've never heard like a land acknowledgement like that. I also think too, like I know we're on Indigenous land. I appreciate for not jumping to like, hey, you should tell us what to do, because it's just like, yeah, I know. Like I know. Like why am I doing the land acknowledgement? I know, like we're on Native land. I think it's an acknowledgement that other people have to make, and to really create that connection to like the land and understand what that looks like. But again, like back to the whole like language piece, like I can't even like stress how important it is that like we open our minds to people who have very different experiences particularly people who are rural, live in the prairies, who have never really had exposure to like this kind of language. Like this is a very urban attitude to belittle others for not understanding things that are not talked about in other communities. So I would urge, like, you know, people do what they need to do to like increase their capacity to sit in that discomfort, because it is important and you will learn a lot. I have learned a lot from people who don't know how to say, you know, like they talk about intersectionality without saying the intersectionality. It's not that people aren't thinking about these things, it's just they are doing it in the way that is most comfortable for them, and we should actually be accepting of that, especially when we think about indigeneity, because that's literally how they grew up in the land that they're from. So for me, like, it is like a non-negotiable when we're in urban settings, when we're in settings that are actually like very much tied to like higher places of higher academia, because I find this is like pretty prevalent in cities that are actually like have universities in them. How do we create accessibility for people who are in other places? And honestly, that does go back to like indigeneity, because I swear like natives will have this conversation in a very different way, but it still gets to that point. So how are we going to be more supportive of that? Unfortunately, though, I will say this is something I've been talking about for over 5 years. Like we're probably closer to a decade now, about the importance of like language inclusivity. But we're now at a point in time where we are seeing the side effects of what happens when we don't create that space. And now the other side is mobilizing in a way that is faster, and that is going to have dire consequences. So I think that's also something to be very cognizant of as we move forward. As you know, we're going into a new year with elections coming up. Like whatever happens in the States will at some point impact us, but and not to make people worry, but it is a dire situation right now. So it is something that I think we all need to be thinking about as we move forward, and how are we going to have these conversations within our communities, within the people around us. I can't stress that enough. But again, all of these things are rooted within like, you know, being in my communities with like other Indigenous folks, and the things that I've learned from Indigenous people, and how do I bring that into these spaces? Because again, bridge building is definitely one of my favorite things. It's a very Gemini thing. I am a Gemini, so I am, I'm very passionate about community stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much, and thank you, RJ. What I'm taking away from that discussion is our need to sort of listen to Indigenous people, share, if not give, our resources, our money, land back. You know, I think that these things are really important if we're going to continue working on these lands, is to always keep that in the forefront. I know even in the YouthLine context, when I think about language, you know, when we're on the helpline speaking to youth, you know, we're not all counselors, right? We're all just other 2SLGBTQ youth talking to other youth from around Ontario, right? And in our training, we do talk about language, and we do talk about, you know, we have a lot of social workers who volunteer with us, or social work students, right? But keeping our language accessible for young queer and trans people, keeping our language accessible from folks who, you know, like I say, in the Black context, you know, from the hood, they're not gonna understand our theory a lot of times. They're not gonna understand our academic context, right? But how do we bring it back to the roots and make things make sense for most people, not just a few people? So really appreciate that conversation. I want to shift gears a bit. We're in a time, you know, when we think about indigenization in a global context, you know, first of all, free Palestine. But over the past several months, there have been moments that both strained and strengthened queer and trans organizing in Ottawa, right? I think about what's happened at Capitol Pride. You know, we hear about the recent closing of CCGSD. You know, so there's strengthening, there's straining on the land here and on the ground here. So wondering from you all, how do we meet this moment? Where do we go from here with, you know, global genocides, in a time where our rights are regressing? You know, where do we go from here? What can we do? What's on your mind in regards to that? Maybe Faye, we can start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the big question. I think so. Like maybe to pony off a bit of what RJ was saying. I think like it's like recognizing the moment that we are in and understanding how we got here. I like to joke, and I almost had a gender studies major, so if you have this major, you can't come for me when I say this. But I want like more folks who have a college education tapping into our space versus folks who have like gender studies, rhetoric and language and theories. Because I think we have to realize first that like we are in a time where life in general is getting harder. Where, you know, that farmer or factory worker that I was speaking about has a harder time making ends meet, putting food on the table for his family. And then we often come in and we're like, you have to care about those trans people over there. And I'm gonna speak with language that you don't understand. And then their impression is gonna be, well, I have a lot of other stuff going on. I have no relationship to you. And now I feel like I'm being talked down to. I go into a lot of like non-queer lefty spaces, and there is a worry that they have to walk on eggshells around how they talk about us. And that if they make a mistake, we're gonna come for them. And the funny thing is, like, this is a thing that has been orchestrated by the far right, and it's important to name that. Like, this is Rebel News, this is National Post, this is a whole ecosystem that wants people to be scared of topics of gender and sexuality, of anti-oppression, intersectionality, and social justice. But we also will fuel it and contribute to it ourselves. And so I think that, you know, the way that we rise to the challenge of the moment is, I think, recognizing the fundamental struggle that everyone is going through. I think then it is seeing like the common experiences across. I think intersectionality, we have often understood it to be, you know, you can't, my experience is different from yours, you have no point of reference to it. And I don't think that's actually the theory of intersectionality. And I think it's important as we do this work to never equate experiences, but we can draw parallels. And so, for example, you know, when I speak about what's happening in schools right now in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and New Brunswick, I often say that whether you're like a disabled kid, a trans kid, a racialized kid, you know what it's like to have teachers make assumptions about who you are, screw up your name, and to have your peers treat you differently because of how you live your life. And that is a message that can bring, I think, some solidarity, some empathy and understanding from folks across all those communities. And so if the opposition strategy is to divide us, and that's what they're doing right now, right? Like it is like faith communities versus gays, it is trans kids versus parents. We actually can choose a different approach, and that is to say, like, this is about healthy schools where kids have the freedom to be themselves, where whether you are Muslim or gay or disabled or a poor kid, where you have everything you need to live a good life. And so I think some of it is like, how do we talk differently? How do we build those bridges? Because the name of the game on the opposition side is polarization. And we actually lose when we are polarized. They win because it makes it harder for us to see the humanity in our neighbor. And then how do we like build the power in our organizing? I think often I love Instagram, but I'm spending less time on it because it actually fuels part of the problem. When you share the like hottest take with the most like rah-rah social justice-y language, we are then rewarded with that language. And we don't always think about what is the language that will bring somebody who doesn't agree with us into our world. And so then we build these little echo chambers, and I use that word intentionally actually. We build these little echo chambers where we're rewarded for speaking gay speak, rather than speaking in a way that is like grounded in shared values with a vision for the future rather than just what are we fighting against. So what is the world we're trying to build? Not just what is the world we're trying to like stop them from shoving down our throats. I don't know if that was like a, you know, strategy debrief context, but that is the like, we have to respond differently and
Absolutely.
build movement capacity in a way we haven't lately.
Absolutely. We have to welcome more folks in and make that accessible. Yes. Thank you, Faye. You can go down the line. Absolutely, Keziah.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that happened earlier this year, and the lesson that I took out of it was character before culture. This huge idea of just like knowing that you're building something within yourself. I think I'm gonna speak for myself, but as a younger gay, there's always like this like need and draw for like what's authenticity, like what is, you know, gay enough, what is standing up for my community, and everyone, you know, is trying to make an understanding of that while also trying to interact with, you know, your peers. We have our disabled folks talking about you know, safety within our spaces. We have Black folks talking about, you know, not, you know, being seen in the queer space. We have our trans, non-binary. There's so much like a lot of intersecting identities, and the idea of like building bridges has really helped me to like understand that there's a lot more here. There's a lot more that we are in common than are not in common. And the situation was earlier this year, I was in the Outright International's office in New York, and I was there to listen to the research and advocacy priorities for a bunch of different organizations and how they're going to like mobilize and take this back to their home countries and start, working against this idea of far right. And so I'm going to just shed a little bit of light on that. Just basically, like, they got us. They are working overtime. The World Health Organization, like, released this report for trans health, and, like, every single member on their advisory committee got doxxed. And basically, we had to come to the table and just understand. And as one of the youngest people in the room, I was like, I shouldn't even be here. Like, I don't know what's going on. I had people being like, no, like, stay, just listen. I'm writing, I'm reporting. And as I was going through it all, I remember leaving that day and I felt so disconnected. I was like, I don't understand the space enough. I'm not connected. But the more that I learned about, my peers, the more I learned about other struggles, what's happening in Jamaica, what's happening in the Caribbean, what's happening in Asia and Africa, along the lines of like the backsliding in all these spaces. I was like, wait, we have a lot of shared values. We have a lot of shared like fights that we're trying to get through. And I think as a youth, like pulling back and starting to understand that our character is a lot more similar, we stop falling into the trap of like, we have to be this, gay movement that's not like, that's standing up against all these things. And I'm watching everyone like, you're missing the mark completely. You're not, you don't have shared values. You don't understand when we say, safety between the community is wearing a mask. Safety between, a community is like little things where we're watching, our spaces become a little bit unsafe. We're watching, our friends be left on the side. And I think as for myself, I think watching like the smaller interpersonal connections be the thing that drives like the larger organizing and the larger activism is what's like really blossoming me. And I'm finding that like my mentors and my, people in the community who continue to be like, break down what you know, break down what you are trying to do, break down and get back to what you really want for yourself. And like, don't be scared that you have, like, don't be fearful of what you represent because you're just making like more space for yourself. I think as a Black woman, I feel like that was what I had to use for myself. And then I was like, wait, I'm not done. Like, I very much have a lot more to say, and I very much have a lot more to do within our space. I think as well, and I say this with a grain of salt because we need to be more inclusive of, the people within our own community. We have RJ sitting here and talking about, Two-Spirit youth, not being within our communities. We talk about, non-binary folks or trans folks not being actually allowed. And we, as youth, we know that, we are hiding behind, like, the idea of our queerness so that we can propel some sort of authenticity, like I was saying. But now it feels like I don't need that label. I don't need that. I need to know why I'm connected with my friends. I need to know why I'm, championing for your safety. I need to know why I'm championing SRHR or CSE, all these like random acronyms. Like, no, like break down all of that and understand why, you're understanding about HIV prevention. Why are you understanding about, all these different, resources in our community? Like, these are for what? The safety of us and our friends. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Any thoughts, RJ? Can you read the question again?
Yeah.
Question? Okay. So over the past several months, there have been moments that both strained and strengthened queer and trans organizing when we think about Capitol Pride, when we think about the global genocides. So we see strain and we see strength in our community and our organizing, but how do we meet this moment and where do we go from here with everything going on?
I would say, I think one of the things that I feel that it should also be focused on, and stuff that I've been thinking a lot as well, is like I'm getting older, I'm not in my 20s anymore, is like ways that we can also like care for like our bodies through this. I mentioned I'm like very much like a roots person. And one of the things that I've realized, like through doing activism, was the ways in which like I've neglected like my own health through activism, and how that actually like catches up with your body like later in life. There are a lot of things like and chronic things that have like definitely flared up that were never issues like in my 20s, and I know it's like circumstances of just not thinking about care until like after the fact, and also to like even care for like mental health as well. I think it's incredibly difficult to like live in a time where there's so much uncertainty and having to like cope and deal with things that are very, very like difficult and hard to like I guess like fully comprehend in terms of like the impacts of like our own selves, and like even thinking about like our own mortality and what does the future look like. I have this conversation with a lot of like young people who have like all like expressed like fear and anxiety around it, and I feel like I think if there's one thing I've learned is like the body does keep track of this kind of stuff. And how are ways that we can think about care for ourselves too going through this time. Because again, like I could go on and on about language and how I'm just like disappointed that, you know, language and inclusiveness of, you know, the factory workers and, you know, just like other people who, you know, experience life differently. But I've literally been saying this for years about how we should be inclusive to people who are different and increase our own tolerance to be able to sit in discomfort and be with people who have very different experiences than us. But one thing I will say is like, as someone who's also stepped back and also reframed my activism to be more comfortable for how I navigate things, like having to take care of myself has been a big thing, not only like with my mental health, because definitely being a part of like queer communities, and needing to be in spaces that require like who I am at very different times when I'm not comfortable. Like I have pushed myself and have like been struggling with like addictions and things like that. And I think we don't talk about, you know, substance abuse enough in queer spaces, and how do we navigate like care in spaces when we're told that we have to show up and be this perceived person that other people, I guess, have perceived. Like if you're an activist, like there's just an expectation that you show up in a very particular way. But the consequences of that, even for myself, is like, yeah, substance abuse and trying to also like move beyond substance abuse too, and having to take a step back and care for myself in a very different way that I didn't have to think about like in my 20s, because my body could keep up with whatever I was doing. So I think as you know, as I'm getting older, as I'm like also navigating like what does recovery look like, and being very thoughtful with the process of that. I think activism also does need to start at home too. So like beyond like what is happening in Ottawa, like what are we doing for ourselves as well? I can only really speak for myself too, but yeah, like 2020 was really difficult, and I think it was the first time I ever really felt completely like not connected and out of control when it came to substance abuse. And I think we don't talk about these things enough, and it was definitely pressures and expectations of that I held within community that made me feel I needed to do certain things when I actually just needed to take a break. So being aware of like how we show up to spaces, I think, is incredibly important. And again, like it also, I think, will allow us to be a little more compassionate for people who are different. And I think, like, again, like, it's not something we should actually ignore. Because, like, yeah, like, I'm literally 30, and I have to get, like, colonoscopies now for the rest of my life. And that's just from, like, neglecting myself through, like, my 20s. And it's just, like, that's the kind of reality that we live in when we're constantly on the go and constantly pushing forward and constantly doing activism. And I can't stress it enough that, like, yes, your health is also important. Like, if you are tired and you need to take a break, please do that. Because who we are when we're not caring for ourselves is who, like, we're pushing out to be supportive and might not actually be the best for those spaces. So I think that's, like, kind of my take on it, because otherwise I would have literally just talked about the language thing that I've already been talking about. Because, yeah, I can't stress it enough.
Absolutely. Rest is resistance. Thanks, RJ. Robert.
Yes. I have many points, and I swear they're connected. At least in my head, they are. A, I feel strongly from readings, from what we're seeing, people who hold narratives and are writers, we are in a precipice. This is a major cultural shift, and how we as a society decide to move forward, if we're going to decide to let an entire group of people be other to the point of non-existence so that other people can have freedom, if we're going to allow climate change, if we're going to allow capitalism to take us over, this is a fork in the road. And there's no doubt in my mind that we're there. And so that's what keeps me awake at night. And so, first point. Second point, self-care is a phrase that came from the Black Panther movement, resistance movement in the 60s and 70s about Black liberation. And it was about the idea of when you're feeling burnt out, that you have a community that you can rely on to help feed you, give you rest, give you what you need, to give you strength to continue. And of course, we know that that term has now been capitalized, where it's supposed to be yoga and candles. And so, going back to RJ's point, is that the revolution needs rest. Next point. In the Smithsonian, which is the United States' main museum and archives, during the New Deal in the 20s, there was a Black group of writers and historians that were commissioned. And they took it upon themselves to interview people who had been enslaved, because they realized that they were at the age where they were going to lose this narrative. They were in their 60s and 70s. I had the privilege of going to the Whitney Plantation, which is outside of New Orleans. It's a site that tells the whole story of what happened on this plantation, focusing on the enslaved people, which is not common at plantations, which is an odd enough thing. On there is a plaque that holds many quotes from these interviews and excerpts. And one that changed me was from Miss Hittite, and she talked about how, in her colloquial language, that slaves had balls, and they would gather in the fields. They had to be very quiet. And then in the morning, they had to act like they weren't tired the next day, or else they would get in trouble. And so that always has stayed with me, because especially as a Black American, there's always this narrative that we're either a Malcolm X or a Martin Luther King Jr., right? We're either radical or we're, nonviolent. And expanding that as a Black gay man of, including James Baldwin or Audre Lorde, Black queer writers. But that quote helped me expand my thinking to everybody is important. Everything is needed for the revolution. We need rest, we need creativity, we need writers, we need fighters, and we also need to make sure that joy is part of our revolution. That's how we go on. Because it was in that moment, it was like, I'd probably be the girl that was throwing the balls in the field. So we can, and I think, our first instance is to say, oh, that's not important, but it's just as important. And then lastly, to bring that all around to the present context, one of the, I find myself describing myself as a Black American who lives in Canada, because I haven't sat with what it means for me to be Canadian, because a lot of things that are espoused here are just very white. To be Canadian is to be white. Peace-loving government, this whole identity that we're better than America, have this whole identity around that. First of all, pick a country to be better than. That's very low bar. And so, going back to this idea of Blackness is queerness, right? So to talk about racism, to talk about terrible things happening is not Canadian. And I don't know where I fit into that. I'm still figuring that out. But one of the things that is, for me, very different versus being America versus Canada is that Canadians are very generous in ideals. There's a lot of resources. There's a lot of references, referrals. When people need help, go to this org, go to that. And we need to do more than that. We need to hands on people. We need to be hugging people. We need to be feeding people. We need to be giving people a place to stay. Of course, we need to do this in a sustainable way. But, in the 8 years that I lived in Ottawa, the number of people that my husband and I, we have come home from work and we have had kids on our porch. We have taken calls in the middle of the night. We have been with people who have attempted to unalive themselves while the paramedics are there. And, it's caused us to sometimes hold back or rethink because, we try to be warm, giving people, but that isn't always reciprocated because we're flagged as warm people, but not seeing that spread out. And what stands out with me is I had an individual who called me once and was like, I've called so many people and you're the first person to answer the phone. And they just needed a place to stay for the weekend. They were in between places. And so, that's my call to action and kind of to summarize all of those points is that we have to find ways to give in meaningful ways that are sustainable and find a role that works best for us in this revolution. And everything is important.
Period. Absolutely. Thank you all. Thank you all. I think it's important to focus and have a discussion about, with everything going on, how do we sustain ourselves? How do we move on? And I hear rest is super important. And I hear taking care of each other to keep showing up and doing the work is super important. So I wanna sort of end on a sort of positive note. I wonder, to close us off for the panel, what are some examples of change, resistance, or community that are giving you hope and energy these days? Anything you've seen over the summer, anything you've seen recently that's bringing you joy, hope, and energy to continue being who you are, doing what you're doing? Keziah, get us kicked off.
Thank you. They actually stepped out, but 2-3-ish years ago, I was working at a cafe, our house in Somerset area. What an area, love it. And I loved it. I was around my people. I was seeing my friends, but a friend, Brenna Egan, they are not here, they just left, started the very first drag at our house event, and it was featuring non-binary and trans artists, and it was amazing. I had so much fun working it, and I was like, oh wow, this is amazing. 2 years down the line, they've done over 30 shows. They are holding it down. They also were the coordinator for Bumpa to Bumpa and all the other events that were happening at Pride. And I think for myself, like watching my friends grow and watching like us grow and watching that, we went from like attending events to throwing them to managing them to getting them funded and seeing, I think Jonas was here, it's the market popping up, like all these creative, places that are popping up around the city where youth are getting not only like inspired, but like executing like high level events and like really, really, really looking to like our, people and, the ones up there who have money who can, give it to us to make, these spaces happen. It's difficult, it's hard. And, like RJ and Robert were saying, like, we do need to take the time to rest, but I'm so proud of everyone for putting in the work and the time, because, again, nothing by us for us. Nothing for us by us. Yeah.
Absolutely. Great word, Keziah. Popcorn style. What are some examples of change, resistance, or community that are giving you hope, energy to continue being you, doing your work?
I can hop in. I think what's giving me hope is actually, like, I sometimes say, I think, life has always been a struggle. The last 20 years have not been easy. And I am 29, to clarify, from RJ's earlier 30s comment. I just do want you to know I have at least 12 more months or a little bit less than to be in my 20s.
Spoken like people in their 30s.
Yeah.
You know what? No, but I think like there's a few things, right? I think one, for me, what has given me joy is actually understanding my role and coming to that. And I think for a lot of us, like it takes a while to do that, and it's not always like the role that you would like you expected yourself to play, but it's the role that you thrive in. I often say like I am not the like person who's going to go on TV and say the most like feisty left-wing radical thing, but I'm going to say something that is grounded in those values that makes like the white suburban mom nod along. And so it is like figuring out our role and being cozy in that space. There's power to that. But the thing that I am loving witnessing right now actually is the birthing of a whole new generation of queer activists. We are in a time of regression, and as we see like the struggles happening in these provinces, they are again like the first time that we've had this much, at least feel like on the queer and trans like political sphere, the first time we've had the concentrated ecosystem of like pro-life, far-right, conspiracy theorists, and also like governments picking on us. And while it has been hell for those folks on the ground, I am also seeing them, you know, build bridges, build coalitions, and build power. And I am seeing that shift in how we organize year over year. I was more worried about where we're gonna be 2 years ago than I am today. My cynical part of me is like, it's gonna be 10 years of messy, and it's gonna be shit, and it's gonna be rough. But what I'm seeing at the same time is people carving out that space and community. I'm seeing us learn the lessons of how do we build coalitions, and that means that not everyone's gonna be on the same page on every issue, but how do we build the movement capacity to rise to the moment. And so I'm seeing, like, I'm thinking we have a drag queen that we hire named Carla Marks. Best drag name in the world. But like seeing her, and there's this group called Queer Citizens United in Calgary. And they are organizing and building power, and they're using drag to help make it happen. Seeing the parents who are speaking up and engaging other parents. And so it is like, I am seeing a generation that is more intersectional in practice, that is more organized, that is also less built on shame and more built on hope. Seeing that come together and seeing those people speak their truth, that is an incredible thing to witness. And the recognition that, you know, I think my older trans gals, when you speak generations, like the Susan Gapkas of the world, so the Toronto gays are like Susan. But even those who came just 5 years ago, like Kai Cheng Tom, I was hanging out with her in Calgary, and she was like, the environment that they were working in 5 years ago was so different from this one. But seeing that, like, the understanding that we have gone through worse than this, that communities have built power and built strength, and that we are gonna get through this as well. I think the strength of our community, like, backlash is the name of the game. It happens every 10 damn years, and if the trans gals who were thrown out of buildings and thrown out of spaces 20 years ago can still be here doing the work today, this generation is gonna push that horizon farther than we'd ever imagined possible.
Thank you, Faye. Very powerful.
I'll go next. I would say, honestly, like, I feel like so much of, like, my 20s has been also, like, being someone who is trans. Like, I find it so hard to go into spaces without that always just being the focus. And I hate that. I hate not being able to be in spaces where I can't just be a person. So I find that, like, I've really been intentional about finding and creating and existing within spaces online with other Indigenous people who have, like, similar passions to me about indigeneity, about promoting queer and transness, and also, like, being able to game and have fun and really just analyzing, like, what is happening on the internet. So for me, like, I think that the shift for me has been really finding a good group of, like, Indigenous and also non-Indigenous people and friends like that I spend, like, a considerable amount of time online. And I find too, like, online friends, when it comes to, like, gaming and things like that, I've connected with people that I didn't realize that I met in real life, and then they're, like, under a different name, because online we never use our actual names, and then being like, oh my god, this is, like, a two-spirit person that I've literally done so much work with, and I can't believe we're now, like, connecting through gaming. That's so wild to me. But I find, like, the focus is less on, like, who you are or your identity, and just, like, finding and building connection with other people has been probably, like, the most authentic thing that I've come to experience in present day, because I think too, with like, there's almost an expectation if you're like a trans person that you have to be an activist 24/7, and it gets really exhausting really fast. And I don't want to be an activist 24/7. I want to be a person too. I want to be a person who can experience joy and be fun, and constantly. People who I previously associated with would often put me in situations where I have to think about political things 24/7, and if I don't, then I'm now not acceptable like in their circles. And I think that's always interesting to me, that I can't be beyond like my identity, and I really don't like that. So to have built a community that is pretty like solid online, where we don't really talk about trans things, but we understand that transphobia is not allowed, and we're able to connect on other issues. Being Indigenous, like hearing what some of my friends in the States experience around indigeneity, and knowing that it's very different from Canada, the things that are similar, the things that are different, connecting about like our different nations, and you know, like what does queer and transness look like in your nation, has been extremely powerful to be able to do that, like even through gaming. So I also think it's like online friends are interesting too, because like oftentimes I feel like there's this hierarchy of like friendships of people who don't understand what it's like to be like I guess like a gamer online. They'll be like, oh, your IRL friends are like more important, and I'm like, I don't think there has to be a hierarchy. And also too, like these people, like even when I'm at my worst, they're present, because like the thing with online friendships is like they have access to you like 24/7 a very different way than people I haven't seen in years. So it's been really interesting as someone who like never played online games to like playing online games and then building a community online to see what that looks and feels like, and the support I'm able to get from them. So it's very, very different than I would have imagined myself doing like 8 years ago. Because like even pre-pandemic, I was very different. I was very social in a very different way. But I realized like that demanded way more from me than I have capacity to give now that I'm in my 30s. And the consequences have caught up with me. So to find people who are kind of like at the pace that I'm at and accept me for who I am, and also like very rarely I don't really tell people what I do like offline. So it's been really awesome to like kind of go through those experiences and feel a little more distanced from myself, but still also gain a lot of knowledge that has actually been very valuable to like the job that I'm like currently in. And it always goes back to inclusivity and language. But yeah, definitely shout out to some of my friends who are definitely watching, because I sent them the link. So much appreciation for them. And that's kind of like really what gives me joy these days, because yeah, like I feel like we don't talk about the psychological effects post-pandemic enough, because I'm definitely a portion of who I used to be before, but I've gotten to a point where I've kind of come to accept that, and I'm in a new part of my life where I want to live authentically with myself, and that also means being okay with the changes that happens as we're aging. So very much happy for the community I've been able to manifest, because I definitely manifested it. Like I definitely wanted something that was for me, and it came my way with the cost of like previous community, but it's also okay too. We learn through loss, and I think that is like what comes after is always a positive thing.
Absolutely.
Such great answers. What's giving me hope is, on a personal level, it's getting older. I think I was meant to be 45. I love it. Since my birthday, it's been amazing to enter this Black gay uncle phase, self-appointed time in my life. It's been great not to spend less time worrying about things that I'm good at, and giving me more time to focus on the things that I want to improve on. But also sitting with the gratitude that I'm here because there's been a very intentional investment because of family, friends, teachers in my life. So sitting with that gratitude. And so that's what's giving me hope from an internal standpoint. But as an externally motivated individual who loves compliments and loves feeds off social interactions, it's also been a very interesting process to learn how to be internally motivated and do things that allow me peace of mind to sleep at night. And then we'll say lastly, from a community standpoint, I did not have on my bingo card capital Pride standing on business. This year, I did not
I'm so proud.
Yeah.
see it, especially after what happened in Toronto and other places. I was like, I read that statement and I was like, damn, okay. But I share that to say is that Ottawa Pride was a really hopeful time. It was nice to, as I said on social media, cut through the noise of single white gay men, I'll name them particularly, whose main discomfort was, you know, they didn't get to have the pride that they wanted to have. Okay, well, you know, you have the whole world. So, but it also allowed to cut through the noise and to exist with community in a way that I never had in Ottawa. To know that at least on some level, if you're here because we're here to see the humanity in all people. We're here to not just have intergenerational dialogue. And I think, you know, being that this is an intergenerational panel, it's important to also, you know, it's important to not just think of that in such a formal way. It's not just older people talking to younger people. It's vice versa. It's talking to your peers. It's making sure that you're talking to people who are in our queer family that have different experiences from us, you know, as a gay man, what it's like to sit and listen to trans folks, to non-binary folks, to Indigenous folks, and be informing each other and helping to build each other up. And that's what I got to experience this Pride, and hopefully we can continue that energy.
Absolutely. Go off the energy of the summer. Let's give them a round of applause, y'all. Thank you so much. You know, this is a panel where, you know, youngest person's 23, oldest person's 45, you know, and it's just nice to sit down and remark, you know, on this journey. You know, YouthLine has been existing for 30 years, supporting queer and trans folks around the province. And, you know, these are some of the folks on the ground, you know, outside of our helpline, who are doing the work, who are connecting to community and youth who need community. So really, from the deepest part of my heart, all of you have had some kind of impact on my ability to be here and sit here and do some of the work I do. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for being here and sharing all your words with me. Thank you. I want to throw it out to you all in the audience. Does anybody have questions for the panelists? You can come up, I can hand you the mic.
While we're buffering, I just want to give a special shout out to Noah for doing an amazing job facilitating this panel, for organizing. He's had many roles and impacts on this community as well. It's been mutual. And yeah, thank you for holding YouthLine down, for celebrating their 30th anniversary in a good way. We appreciate you.
Hi, Peter. I know what I'll go this way, I guess. Sorry. Pink washing, diversity washing. Unfortunately, it's still happening. And it's sad, you know, you see corporate logos or in things, you know, around Pride and nothing else at the other 360 other 4 days of the year. How do you work through that? How do you challenge organizations? How do you vet organizations that are supporting you to ensure that they're safe and inclusive as you are?
Yeah, we could go popcorn style.
Yeah, so personally, I've divested from system change in that regard. So in terms of something that stands out to me is Monique Hart, drag performer, Drag Race. She had an amazing Billboard interview a few years ago after she came out with All Stars. You know, in which, to terribly paraphrase, she was like, you know, gay culture is just white supremacy reimagined in a pink wash, right? Because who has the capital for the as gayness as we understand it in this context, you know, who's own the gay bars, who's own the porn production companies, who's own these narratives that get to be sold. And so, you know, her speaking as a Black queer performer of, I have to negotiate these spaces to get what I need to make my presence heard, but then go about my business so I can be with community in a way that feels good. So that's the approach that I've taken personally. And yeah, I mean, it's a thing for sure, but I think it's just speaking to it. For me, it's just speaking to it personally and making sure that I'm taking as much care of either my clients or my community in the way that feels good and sustainable, to know that those voices are heard, and to also give alternatives. I think there's, white supremacy has also worked out where the alignment with whiteness comes with a perceived sense of power and image. And so to give space to unpack those conversations with folks, I know that comes up a lot at K1 and the Black queer folks who I talk to, of how to find an identity and self-image that's positive for yourself, where you're not seeking the validation of those who don't want you in those spaces anyway. And that's a very hard and complicated conversation to have. It's hard to admit that to yourself. I do it every day. When I think about the little Black gay Robert in my 20s, who, it's something that I'm very transparent with, that I share. And I usually don't share this in mixed company, but I will hear it for the sake of conversation, which is, I used to be one of those Black gays that would be like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't date Black, but I only date white guys. And I've had to sit with that, right? I've had to unpack that, move forward, gain that sense of self, a lot of therapy, a lot of books, fortunately, a lot of friends, a lot of elders, a lot of folks around me to help build that. And so now being in a position where I want to be a person who does that for others. So, yeah.
I love this. I mean, I have a love-hate relationship with this question. It's a good question. But I think, the baseline of, like, how do we manage with, like, corporations that are whitewashing, pinkwashing, and engaging in horrible things? And I like to start from the, like, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. And all of us are engaging in these systems. Like, we're paying taxes to a colonial government. We are, like, most of our nonprofit society, world is dependent on government funds. Where do government funds come from? What are they complicit in? And so I think there is a whole discussion, and there's a tension point when it comes to, like, companies that are throwing money at gays and then using it to, like, look good and feel good. Tricky flip side to that is, like, what happens when backlash means that corporations are backing away. And that is the country that we are seeing today. We are seeing corporations that used to fund or used to sponsor or champion, like, roll back on those things, both in terms of, like, hiring practices, inclusive workspaces, but also funds the community. And so, I have maybe it's a cynical or realist, like, take on this. It's the, like, crassly, I think that we do more things with their money than they get out of the relationship. If corporate money is gonna make it so that we can give a less homeless gay kids, I'll make that call every single damn day. Because what matters to me is that the funds that we receive, and, like, TD Bank is the best example. They give money to the gays like nobody's business, and I am dying to have some of their money. Because I need some of that money to fight a, like, regression on the rights of queer and trans people. But we're gonna take that money, we're gonna consciousness raise, we're gonna birth a generation of organizers that will bring us closer to a future where we do not need some damn corporation to fund the fight and to fund our basic needs. And I think that is the place that I land. It's the same thing as, like, I think I have my focus laser set on, like, a bigger target, and I think we sometimes go for what's most convenient. I see that with great love to how we manage, like, in queer communities. One of the things, like, it is easier to get angry at organizations that are close to us than to blame systems and structures, and to take the time to understand, why are these organizations, including pride organizations is a great example, why are they engaging and making the choices that they are, and how do we create the space so that they can actually make better choices? That is what I would say that, like, Palestinian solidarity rallies and movement did, that allowed a space for Capital Pride to do what it did this year. And so how do we keep leaning into that and building those spaces? Because there is no, like, ethics, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. And so if we're gonna play that game, let's play it smart, and let's use the funds that we receive to build the foundation for a future that isn't built like this one is.
Totally agree. Thank you, Faye. Especially as I'm sort of an operations manager looking at granting and ways to fund this work. I think that statement very much resonates. Absolutely. RJ or Keziah, do you have thoughts on this question?
I might pop in.
You do fundraising?
Yeah, I do fundraising. I do want to say that, like, okay, everything that Faye said is exactly that. Because, like, I think that for example, TD Bank. I'm going to use TD Bank because no, I'm so sorry to TD Bank. We had Pride Night, Blue Jays game sponsored by TD earlier this year, and we attended. And I remember I was with the financial coordinator at LGBT YouthLine, and we saw the check come out, and we're like, oh, wow, that's so amazing. And we're like, oh, like, is that for one of us? Or no, like, the 10, 15 organizations that are here, we're about to split that 30K check. Like, we're about, like, there's no, like, we're not all getting 30K. And then I thought about, you know, the antics and the visuals of what this looks like, a bunch of, like, queer organizations holding, like, a huge pride flag. And I'm looking at how empty the seats are, and I'm looking at how, you know, TD is quite literally funding a genocide. And I'm watching that there's a huge disconnect, a very huge disconnect. And I think that as youth, like, I'm looking to the future. I'm looking to take your money and actually bring down you as a full corporation. And that's not like to say, like, it's very easier said than done, but it's very much like, for example, last year we had, I worked with the Children's Aid Foundation, and they had an Israeli, you know, family foundation support the huge gala that they throw every year. And we were like, the theme was Indigenous Futures. What are you guys doing? Like, this is a colonial, you know, like, rhetoric that we're trying to put forward here, and we think that it shouldn't be here. It shouldn't be safe here. It shouldn't be allowed here. There's no, you know, if you're here for the welfare of children, then you should really be thinking about what you mean by taking money while you're hurting children in another area. It doesn't really, you know. And this year we had them take them out, but who was sitting in, you know, those seats? The other 5 banks that are around. And so it's like a continuous cycle of continuing to, like, show up for what you believe in, but also, like, don't be scared to tell an organization or a corporation no. Like, don't be scared to be like, I'm so sorry, we can't go into this deal, because you choose to give your money to these people. You choose to give your money to, you know what I mean, all these spaces. And then you want to turn around and, like you said, pink wash or diversity wash. And I think that it's hard as an individual when you are like, I know what I'm here to stand for, but as an organization, you know what the movement of your work is meant to do. And in those tough decisions, I think it's very fair that some organizations are saying no and turning back. And like I said, like everyone's been saying, I'm so proud of Ottawa Pride. Like, it was so much more authentic. And I saw a sign that was like, Pride was the first Antifida. Am I pronouncing it right? Yeah, and I was like, wow, like, you know, I think that, you know, we forget that we're a protest to begin with, so, yeah.
Exactly. We have time for one more question. If someone has a burning question or comment for the panel.
I have a question.
Ooh.
Is that crazy? I have a question?
No, we have a question.
Oh, okay, we do?
Maybe
Oh,
we
sorry,
could do
guys.
both. What's your question, Keziah?
Oh, it was a question to my fellow panelists. If you wanted to give a piece of advice to your 23-year-old self, what would you say? Queer self, if you could.
Can we get a moment to buffer?
Yeah. I would tell myself as somebody, you know, who was just moving to Toronto at 23 to go find the community that I wanted to work with, you know, that there is community here in Ottawa. We can make spaces here in Ottawa. They can be sustainable here in Ottawa. And there are a lot of stereotypes that, you know, resonate, and that some are just like crap about Ottawa and like the dynamics and the demographic of Ottawa. And I'm not disagreeing with that, but I'm also sitting up here and, you know, have shared space for many years. Keziah, we met recently, but with many years with, you know, Robert, RJ, and Faye. And so, you know, we've been here. And so, you know, I think that, you know, if you are young and you are, you know, getting into organizing in Ottawa, I think it's a matter of showing up and just tapping in to some of these folks here and what's going on, because I think those narratives of like what's happening here, it's so white, it's so this, it's so that. Yes, we hear that, but there are pockets that we are finding, that we are carving, and we are taking up space more and more. Yeah.
I have my little piece of, I think when I was 23, I was not good at taking like advice or guidance from those who were a little bit older than I was, and I think I'm still not. But that's a me problem. But I think it is just like take the time like to understand the history of our communities and our movements, and what brought us to where we are today, and then like I think I wish that I had learned, like I was in fight mode all of the time, and it was like gotta like change the world, but to just like take some more time to like enjoy life is actually a big piece of advice for me. And then the other piece is just like remember that the enemy wants you to see everyone as your enemy, and that we have like most people are trying their best, including folks who will hurt you, including organizations that will hurt you. Most folks are trying their best, and actually understanding that circumstance lets you see their humanity while also letting you see that harm is still harm.
The one thing I will tell my 23-year-old self is if you see someone in the community taking up space and continuously causing harm in a position of leadership and you have the opportunity to change that. Because I have definitely been complicit in allowing people to go forward and do organizing in communities when they shouldn't have been doing organizing in communities. And this isn't even just like within queer spaces, this is also in Indigenous spaces as well. One of the things that happens a lot in Indigenous spaces is like, because we have like lots of families that are like usually a part of our communities, I find there's like lots of nepotism that happens within communities as well. I think applying the same rules from from Indigenous to queer spaces doesn't necessarily work, but there should be trial and error on how we navigate conflict within like organizations. Like in both communities, I've always noticed there's always like organizational siloing, and I don't think there's a lot of resources or tools on how to go beyond that. But honestly, like I've seen a lot within doing like Indigenous governance stuff, and as well as queer spaces, and it's always like allowing discomfort of talking about things that need to be talked about and pushing it to the back burner, that actually creates just huge ripples within community that can't necessarily be mediated down the road. And leaving it to next generations to like deal with those kinds of things. I would absolutely go back and change those things. That's the one thing I would do, and ethically like knew at the time, but just never really thought about. But was very much like into nepotism myself. So that's actually like there's no separation between that. That is one of the biggest things that I think about often. And power that people and social capital people have in spaces too, and giving social capital to people who have hurt others. That's something I think about often, and I wish I could go back and change. And also like selling the building at Ottawa. We used to have a really good building. Being on the board that sold that building, no. Worst feeling in the world. I think about it often. It lives rent-free in my mind. That happened when I was 18. I am 32 now. I think about it all the time. So
I helped change the name of CCGSD to CCGSD, which is one letter too many, so I also have regrets.
I get it. Like honestly, all the boards I've been on, please, that's the one thing that haunts me. I had no power. I could not do anything in that situation. I still think about it all the time, though.
For real.
What would I tell my 23-year-old self? I think is it's okay to root from people up close and from a distance. And this is advice that I've given to others, and in reflection upon myself is I've always been a half full person. Sometimes my younger sister and I talk about this, where we're the type of people where I've been with my sister and we've just been standing at the bar waiting for drinks, and people just started crying and saying we're their best friend. I've always had this presence where people have just been been drawn, and I haven't always known how to lean into that and accept that as part of my truth and part of my existence. And so I've let a lot of people in, or felt like I had to love on full cylinder to everyone at all times. And so learning to draw back has been extremely helpful, and that statement has helped me. And a lot of folks have come to me and said that, recently I had a friend tell me that they have appreciated that advice because it's let them be a little bit more open to other folks. So constantly finding that balance. And then picking back off of, RJ was kind of speaking to a second point that I've had in my head, which has been such a simple but powerful statement, is that we are not chasing perfection. I've made, yes, those things that keep us up at night, that drip in the back of your head. I know with, starting a Black queer discussion group, the things that I've said, the unintentional gatekeeping and barriers that I unknowingly set up and have had to tear down, and fortunately have had people to be honest and call me out and help me move through that. But yeah, we're not perfect, and we're never going to be. And we have to check our intention, make sure that we have people who are around us that are honest, that are going to keep us accountable, not just hearing what we want to hear. That's advice from Beyonce. She doesn't have just yes people, and nor should we. So yeah, I would say those are my two things: not chasing perfection, and it's okay to root from people at various levels.
Since I'm imagining we're about. Can I just jump in with a quick thing?
Yeah,
I have
absolutely.
I think one of
last
the things,
words.
Yeah.
We're gonna do a round of last words.
Okay, good. I will.
Yes.
This will be okay.
Okay.
I think one of the things that I love is, and maybe this is just like my way of coming to community, but I think we imagine that community is gonna love you and be your bestie, and like community does not mean you are friends with everybody. I wish that we could teach, every gay person needs the here's your membership card. There are caveats, and sometimes we're gonna be mean about it. And I think remembering that community does not mean, expecting community to be good to you all the time is gonna break you. And I think that is the lesson that we tell people coming into space is it's gonna be so good, and there are gonna be great people. You will find love. You will make so many lovely bad decisions. But community is not like you and your best friends. Community is not family. And I think understanding that we are building and negotiating our relationship with community, and you got to find your people. And just because they share an identity with you does not mean they are your people. So that's one thing that's maybe a little bit depressing. I think the other thing is just an encouragement. We have a federal election that is coming up within the next 12 months. And we have, this massive era of regression that is around the corner. And so this to me is my invitation to tap in whatever that looks like. That can be supporting progressive candidates that you believe in. That can be knocking on doors for those folks. That can also be chatting with your friends and your family and helping folks buy into why, even if you hate the system, voting is an act of harm reduction. Voting is an act of trying to stop worse things from happening. And I really worry about the amount that because we are taught that the world has to be and should be here, that then everyone falls below that standard, and always our political parties will. But part of how we win is to build the power to then influence them and pull them this way, and tapping in is part of how we do that. And now, because I love to plug a URL, we are doing election training and supporting folks to prepare for the upcoming federal election. And if you'd like to attend a webinar or online training session, the next of which is Surviving and Thriving as a Gay Doing Media, you can visit www.momentumcanada.net/election. And we're going to be putting a whole campaign trying to get all of the gays and all of their friends and all of their enemies to show up and vote for the kind of future that we want. And so tap in however you can, because we need those bodies on the ground, and we need folks in every community organizing, building those bridges, and building power. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Faye. Tap in with Faye. Absolutely.
www.momentumcanada.net/election. It's the first time I've had positive, I was expecting to speak slower. And thank you.
My last words actually, it touches upon what Faye said in their advice for 23-year-olds them. it was understanding queer history and knowing, the foundation that brought us here. Earlier this year, I was eager to get within the movement, guys. I was like, I got this. I wasn't that eager. I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't tapped in as I thought I was. All things that, I think RJ talked about, like titles and spaces, and will cloud your view, and take some time back to really understand the work that you're doing and like what came before you. I remember people from a gal talking about, like, I was at the very first, queer protest at this very first meeting, like, check, next. And I'm like, I think my grade 3 teacher was cute. Like, I wasn't there. And I think that the key to understanding the space has been these intergenerational, I hope, connections, and people that I've met along the way that have taught me that perfection isn't everything, and that you are learning about the space just as you are existing in it, and you are also learning about yourself, and you're forming your own identity as to who you are. And I think as I learn more about my history, like Ghanaian queer history, African queer history, here in Canada, the mobilizing that's already been done, I'm like, okay, like I now know the past, and we are now ready to move forward. But you need that bridge, you need that connection, you need to know what we're grounded in and what we're learning from. And I think that lesson that I learned this year has really taught me a lot about how I come to the space. And I literally have told LGBT YouthLine, I'm like, guys, don't call me a board member. Like, I feel like I'm learning more from you guys than the other way around. I think that that's how that humility is allowing me to really be within community and be within the space to understand, and not just to like impart my fake knowledge. So it's been cool to really learn that and to be in the space. And like, I find that in organizing, like, we are being very gracious with each other, because the person on the other side is not in our corner. So it's been very, very interesting to like learn how to be patient with how I'm gaining knowledge and how I'm making connections. But I would say that, like, as a youth, like, don't be scared to like knock on doors, and don't be scared to like ask, hey, what do you guys got going on? Or hey, what's the the previous amount of work that you guys have done on this, or who's informing your work, or what who inspires you. Continue to like ask questions and probe your peers and elders and our elders, and just learn. Learning is the resisting. So yes.
I would say definitely learning happens from our mistakes. And one of the things I've also learned is that you can be in, community spaces with people you don't like and still be respectful to everybody. I think that's also something important, and one very much rooted in like values within Indigenous spaces that I go into. And again, like going back to like the nepotism stuff, since this is something that I think about a lot, and also ways in which like I've definitely engaged in nepotism. It's just because someone is your good friend doesn't mean that you should excuse like when somebody is actually causing harm to others. And I think that's something that I feel like as queer people, we tend to coddle folks who are in those leadership powers, because we don't want people outside of those communities seeing in, especially now with the ways in which like queer people are targeted. But I think if we actually want to build these inclusive communities that we're talking about, that are going to be welcoming to everyone, people who are survivors should be the forefront on our minds. And as someone who now works in a field that focuses on sexual harassment, and sexual harassment specifically in the workplace, I think a lot about how silence is violence, and how I've also been complicit in causing and being silent during times I shouldn't have been. I know we can only work and go and move forward from learning from these things, but I also think it's important to continuously take accountability and remind myself like I want to do better and be better as a person who is actively like thinking about these things and engaging in work around this area. So friends don't get a pass anymore. If someone is causing harm, I will talk about it, even if it makes us uncomfortable. I have to live that way. Otherwise, like, how will these communities, like, get to a better place?
Did you give your last words, Robert?
Yeah.
Finish this off.
I'll share that, there's, from a psych-social standpoint, there's the developmental milestones, right? And this is my opinion, somewhat mixing with a little bit of nursing, but 16 to 24 is a very narcissistic time period, right? You're figuring out how you relate to you're figuring out your relationship with the world from your perspective. And as you get older, you start, that thinking gets turned around and you start understanding your relationship with the world around you and how it's impacting you. And so I think, we talked about learning and regret and listening, and all those are really valuable things. I don't want to undercut that, but also, give ourselves space to just grow. I used to have a therapist in my 20s, James Manzella. God, I wish I would have listened to that man more. I would have saved myself a lot of heartbreak. But he used to tell me, Robert, you don't have to have everything figured out. And I'd walk in that room every week and be like, I got my life together. And he'd be like, here we go again. And I used to feel bad about that time period. But now that I've been able to look back at it with hindsight, it's like I was young, and I really wanted to believe that I could change the world by going to this party or dancing with this boy or... And maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But I would say, it's to allow ourselves grace, allow ourselves room to grow, would be my last words to leave with everyone.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. One more round of applause for y'all for them. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. My last words are just some gratitude. LP, do you want to do this part, or should I continue? Okay, I'm going to do the thank yous. So I really want to thank all of you, first and foremost, for being here. I know there's a lot of people in this room who could probably be up on this panel talking about the amazing work you do. I see some of your faces here, and we all do this together on these lands. So thank you very much for being here, spending your long weekend with us, spending your afternoon with us. I'd like to thank our ASL interpreters, Marianne and Ashley, for supporting this event tonight. I would like to thank our tech, Tafari, who helped with the lighting, the stage setup, the room setup, the tech, everything like that. I'd like to thank JL for monitoring our live stream. Hello to everybody around Ontario who's watching us. I'd like to thank Jose and Energy for running the welcome table and helping out today. Would like to thank S Kitchen, Esther Fagbola, for catering the wonderful food if you had some when you came in. Our executive director, Lauren Craig, thank you very much for all of your support, for coming from Toronto to Ottawa to spend time with us here, getting to know the people in Ottawa. To all of you, I feel like I thanked you a million times, but thank you so much. There's more ways to engage with YouthLine. We're going to have a slideshow that's going to play until we're out of here around 3:30. So you're welcome to hang out. Please enjoy the food. We have lots of food. Enjoy some food. Talk to the panelists for as long as they're around. Come talk to myself, Lauren, if you want to learn more about YouthLine. If you'd like to support our work, you can offer a donation at our table. We're happy to chat about our work. In this time of activism, charitable giving is really down. A lot of nonprofits and charities are struggling. And so if you do have it to give to YouthLine or any organization, that is much appreciated. But just spreading the word about YouthLine, letting youth know that we're here to listen to them in Ottawa, that they can reach out to us anytime Sunday to Friday from 4 to 9:30 and reach another 2SLGBTQ youth who gets it is what I want to leave you with. So thank you so much. Have a good afternoon, and hang out for us for a bit. We'll be here till 3:30.
And give Noah a round of applause for being a kick-ass moderator.
Yeah, YouthLine. That was so cute.
not, child, and don't cry. Your folks might understand you by and by. Just move on up toward your destination. Though you may find from time to time complication. Bite your lip and take the trip. Though there may be wet road ahead and you cannot slip, just move on up for peace you'll find. Into the steeple of beautiful people where there's only one kind. So hush not, child,